What's up, y'all? James Attaway here, and we're going live, and hopefully my audio really works this time. It's amazing how audio for video trips me up, but if you give me music to mix, I'm good to go. So if you're new here, go ahead and hit subscribe and ding the little bell. I've got some great stuff for you coming down the pipe. Today we're talking about how to set up your audio console. Last time we went over the plan. This time we're going to go over how to execute it. And I didn't just wear the turkey costume because we're executing something. So hopefully you had a great Thanksgiving or whatever holiday you might have celebrated in the last few weeks in your part of the world. So glad to have you here. I'm happy to be here. It is Cyber Monday, and I do have a deal going for my Mixing Foundations course. This is the course where you get to learn the step-by-step basics, fill in all the training that you might have missed that you didn't get from the guy that trained you before you left, or that you just got thrown in and you're like, all right, you can push up the faders, here you go. All the rest of the stuff, every detail that you need to know to start growing in audio. It's not going to cover every pro tip ever. You can't do that in 20 lessons, but you can get started with it, and it's available right now for a buy one, give one. So if you buy a Mixing Foundations course for $99, you get a free coupon code to send to a friend so they can take it with you, or you can split it and go halvesies. That's totally up to you, but you just pay me once. So that option is available, and you can check out that link in the description below if you're interested in that. Another thing I've got coming down the pipe on videos for you guys. If you haven't yet subscribed, you should go ahead and subscribe. I'm going to tell you to subscribe again. So ding the little bell, get notified every time I go live like this, because how else are you going to catch me in a turkey suit right then? Right? So coming up soon, I've got the Clear Tune Monitor CE320s that I'm going to be reviewing. These are some great in-ears. You're going to like that review. And I'm also going to be making a video on how to make a live record from your worship service. I've done a whole lot of live albums, and so I can walk you through that process and tell you how to get as detailed as you want to get, or as rough and ugly as you want to get, and get that raw kind of live feeling. Let you decide what to do and then how to distribute at the end. So those videos are coming down the way, and you'll want to stick around for that. So today, rustle some papers around here. We're talking about setting up your console and getting your bass scene started. Now, if you didn't watch the last live stream, I went over how you set up your input list and how you plan everything out. All the details that you write down make it easier for other people to carry the torch if you're not there. So there's a huge need to have other people doing audio with you. You can't do it all by yourself. And if you do, you're going to burn out, and that's never any fun. So the more you can document things, the more you can make it simpler for other people to join in, the easier it's going to be. So if you've already made an input list, like we went over a couple weeks ago, I want you to raise your wing, bend at the elbow, and pat yourself on the back. You've done a good job, and you're on your way to making audio great at your church for years to come, not just as long as you're there. Let me check the chat window real quick. Hang on. Yes, popping out the chat. Please excuse me. All right. Woo! All right. I fixed the flux capacitor, or the clux capacitor, as Daniel says. Fantastic. So go ahead and in the chat or in the comments, if you're watching the replay, tell me what console you're using. And if you're watching the replay and not doing it live, go ahead and type Team Replay in the comments below as well. So we've got our input list. We've got our console. Now, how do we get from one to the other? Now, no matter what console you have, right? I've got the PreSonus Studio Live 32. You can see here. I've got my overhead camera here. Whee! So we can see what's on here. And if we're, naming channels and going through, and we're naming our inputs, we can do that. But any touch screen is going to be pretty terrible. Even the best consoles that are out there, their touch screen is kind of hard to type on, so we don't want to do that. So if we're trying to type in kick, we're going to probably misspell some stuff and probably get it wrong. So I really like to do it on the computer. So if I go over here, I've got my input list and I've got my universal control right next to each other, and they are good to go. So here's my input list. Here's my universal control. So now this is connected to the console. You can do it either via USB or via FireWire. Sorry, not FireWire. I'm showing my age. Over Ethernet, so you can do MIDI over Ethernet to control it, and it works great. There's lots of different remote control things. No matter what console you're on, most of them have a remote control software. And even if you can't connect to it live, you can, sorry, this thing is really hot. Even if you can't connect to it live right there, you can usually connect to it on your computer and then load it on a USB stick and then load it from there. It just makes it much easier to actually use a real keyboard. And some of the functions are easier to find when you're in their remote control software as well. So here we go. We've got our input list, and we're just going to start naming our channels. So on 1, we've got kick. On 2, we've got snare. We can hit tab and get to the next channel on this one. And we've got our hat, tom 1, tom 2. This would have taken me this long just to type in kick if I was doing it just on the console. So, again, this is super, super fast. Now, we're at a point here where I've skipped channel 6, if you can see on the input list. Channel 6 is empty because we want to link our stereo overheads. So I'm going to hit tab again to get to channel 7. And I'm going to hit this little link button, and now 7 and 8 are going to be linked. I can name this overhead left, click on the other one, name it overhead right, and we can continue on with our bass and so forth. So we're going to keep going down the input list. We've got bass, acoustic guitar, electric guitar 1, keys, pad, click, all this so that we can put everything together and get it all laid out on our console. Now, I'm not going to sit here and do this the entire time because you guys would get bored and stop watching, and you got to keep watching. So after we've got all our inputs labeled on here, we're going to go ahead and move to our outputs. Now, the next thing that I like to start with is making sure that my monitor sends and my monitor setup is routed correctly. One of the huge benefits of having a bass scene, which we're setting up today, is that some musician can know almost nothing about the console, preamps, gain structure, signal flow, any of that, and they can go find a scene. You can tell them the 3 buttons to push to find a scene, and they can load the right scene, and then they can start practicing. Will their gain structure be perfect? Probably not, but it's going to be a lot easier for them if they can go ahead and get the bass scene going that way. So it makes it a lot more hands-off, and over time you're going to refine this bass scene so that you can get things more dialed in with the gain structure. Like if you're always having to go and crank up the gain on the bass, maybe you should save the bass channel with the gain a little bit higher next time. But you also want to be careful that you're not saving too many specific settings for, say, a singer, one particular singer's EQ on a singer mic if they're not on that mic every single week, right? So you're trying to make it preset enough, but you're also trying to make it vanilla enough that you're not having to undo and backpedal after you've set stuff up so that you can get going again. So if this is making sense so far, go ahead and mash that thumbs up. Let me know that you're with me in the chat box and say hello. So if you're following along so far, if you've got your input list typed in, go ahead and tell me in the chat below. I'd love to see it to make sure that you're with me and that my things are still working, because I am great at making video gear break. That's, I guess, the peril of an audio guy. So now that we've got our inputs in, we're trying to get our monitors set up. And if you're in the fortunate situation where you've got your band is on monitor mixers, right? It's possible to route your inputs to the monitor mixers through aux sends or buses. But whenever possible, please, please, please try to use direct outs if you can. So the more you can free up your buses and groups, the more fun stuff you can do, both for your live stream mix if you're doing double duty on your console, or even for grouping things together just for mixing purposes on your front of house mix. I do this at the International House of Prayer and at Forerunner Church because we've got the buses available. I can group things and compress them, and it makes mixing a whole lot easier in those little tiny, baby steps kinds of ways. It's not like my mix is ruined without it, but it just gives me that extra little bit of control from having those groups to run through for group compression when I'm mixing live. Thank you for letting me know that my things are still working. I'm so glad because, there's nothing more frustrating than gear not working, which is why I'm trying to teach you guys to get your gear set up really well because I know how to make audio gear work great. So we've got that. You want to use direct outs as best you can. If you don't, let's say you're running in-ear monitor mixes or monitor wedges, and they're coming off of monitor sends, right? So we can, we've got these subgroups here, and I'm going to go over to Mix Masters. Let me show you Universal Control. And I clicked over here on Mix Masters. And so now I can adjust the settings of all of these. So I'm going to change, it's on a subgroup right now, which not what I want. If I'm going to set this up for monitors, I'm going to change it to an aux. Are you sure you want to delete the subgroup? Yes. So now I've got it set to an aux, and this is a stereo aux. So let's say that this is my worship leader's in-ear mix. So I would say worship leader IEM, and hopefully that links for both of those. And it is set to post fader right now, but I would like it to be set pre-fader. Why can I not set that pre-fader? I don't know. So now we've got our next two subgroups. Yes, I want to delete that as a subgroup. I want it to be an aux. I don't know why it's still post-fader and not pre-fader, but now we can label this like, singer IM and so forth. So we can go down the line and label these. And the better that they're labeled, the easier it's going to be for someone else to understand. Now, it's also helpful. Let me switch over here to the overhead camera again. We've got others. We've got the buttons over here to get to these mixes, right? So anytime you can use a little label over here to get to these mixes, that can be really, really helpful for somebody that's new, right? So move my microphone over so you get a little bit better sound from me. So if somebody could see, and there's a little label here that says worship leader in-ear mix, they see that beside this, and then they can hit that, and they say, oh, now I've got sends on fader right there. I know how to get to that. Or the singer, now I can adjust that. Anytime you can make it obvious for somebody, that's going to be really, really, really helpful. So labels are your friend. Little label makers can be really, really handy. And so, anytime you can do that, or artist's tape. I'm sorry for touching the microphone and scratching on it. So you're familiar with board tape, or sometimes you guys might have been using masking tape or even gaff tape on your console. And I, for the longest time, just thought it was called console tape, but it's called artist's tape. And it's nice to be able to write on with a Sharpie, and it doesn't leave a residue when you leave it on there and then pull it off. So artist's tape is what you're looking for. If you don't have a label maker, you definitely want to pick up some of that if you're trying to label things. It's also hugely helpful for labeling things like cable ends. If you're having to repatch something, you can just throw a piece of tape on there, say where it was before you unplug it and plug other stuff back in. That's massively helpful. So that's super, super helpful when you label things, right? So we're trying to make things obvious for our volunteers, for new people, for the band who might need to adjust something. We're trying to make it simple so that they don't end up doing a whole convoluted thing just to do something that should have been easy to do. So we've labeled the stuff. We've got our in-ear monitors set up. We've talked about stereo linking. Soft patching. Now, let's go back to our inputs, and we're going to go back here to the Tom2 and then a blank channel and then our overheads, right? So we've got the odd even pairs that we have to link. If you were going to, the soft patching or the digital patching is a real pain. You do not want to deal with this. There are times when you can, and if your whole team is up to like a certain level or can understand stuff, you can go there. But this can get so super confusing. So I try to avoid this wherever possible. Yeah, you don't want to mess with like soft patching if you can. So avoid that if possible. Now, after we've got our effects or our monitor sends set up, now we can talk about our effects sends. If I go back here to my mix masters and I scroll back over to the end, I can start to label my effects masters if I want. So this is only so helpful for when you're looking inside the console, specifically on this desk, because it already has it labeled, you know, effects A, B, C, and D right here. Let me show you. So we've got effects A, B, C, and D. That will also correspond to aux inputs. You can see the effects returns here, A, B, C, and D. These are the returns. If we went over to our effects masters and then went down here, scrolled over a couple, moved our headphones out of the way, we could see these are the effects masters. So then if I come back over here and I rename this, I can call this, you know, Vox Verb, which is probably what I would do. Now back on our console, it has a label up here in tiny. So it's still showing effects A, B, C, D, but it's going to show the little label there. And that can be helpful too. So all kinds of fun stuff there. You can label your effects sends. You can label your effects returns in the same way. The more you label, the simpler it is, the easier it is for other people to join in. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is setting up your VCAs or your DCAs. VCA and DCA stands for voltage controlled amplifier or virtually controlled amplifier or digitally controlled amplifier. Basically, it's like a group in that you can adjust the fader levels of a bunch of different things at the same time, but it's not a group in that you can't process the audio. It's just a remote control. So just like you got your remote control for the TV and you couldn't put a compressor on that remote control and have it do anything, the same thing happens with a VCA or a DCA. It's just a remote control of the faders, and you can assign multiple VCAs to a certain input channel, and the input channel's fader level will be the cumulative level of the fader channel, the channel fader, and each VCA or DCA that it's assigned to. So that can get really confusing, but just remember that it's a remote control, and if one of the faders or one of the DCA faders that channel is assigned to is all the way down at negative infinity, no amount of turning it up is going to get that fader up anywhere and get you any sound out of it. So, when we have these DCAs, we want to make sure that we arrange them in a logical order. And if we're going to try to put things in logical order, we're probably going to have a plan for it. So let's take a look at our spreadsheet again. And here we are. So I've got my mixes and my matrices labeled. Oh, excuse me. This is how we would set things up over here. But now let's set up our DCAs, and we can go 1, 2, and then skip a few and get down to 8. Oh, too many. So we've got DCAs 1 through 8, and we can assign those. And I like to put a little box around it because that helps me visually. So we've got DCA 1, and I try to keep these in a logical order. So your brain can only work so hard to do so many things at one time, and mixing takes a whole lot of brain power. So if you've ever gotten confused at the console, you know that it's such a pain to, like, you're trying to mix. You're not trying to like get the console to behave the right way. You're just trying to get things done, right? So the more logically you can set up everything with your DCAs and your VCAs so that they're in the same order in every place, that's going to be super, super helpful. If you're just tuning in and haven't said hello yet, you can go ahead and say hi in the chat box, or you can type Team Replay if you haven't done Team Replay in the comments below. And again, tell us what console you're running and where you're mixing from. I love to see where people are tuning in from. So super glad to have you guys here. Side note, I've noticed that a lot of people are watching from Indonesia. And if you don't know, that's a country where being a Christian doesn't exactly get you a leg up in the world. So if you're watching from a country that's more closed or more hostile to the gospel, I just want to say thank you for having faith that perseveres. And people that aren't in your country, we see you and we hear you and we're praying for you. Thank you for taking a stand for the gospel and serving when it's not popular and being countercultural there. Just thank you for doing that. So if you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe and ding the little bell to get notified whenever I post a new video. And now we're going to continue talking about DCAs. So we're going to try to keep things in the same order that they are on our console, that they are in our DCA. So we're going to try to match the order of different things. So on our input list, it's easier to show you here because I didn't type in everything. We've got drums to here, we've got bass, we've got guitars, we've got keyboards. All right, so why don't we go ahead and make our DCAs follow that same pattern? So we're going to have our DCA number 1 be drums, and we're going to have bass. Even though there's just one channel, I still like to have the bass on its own VCA because I want it on that top layer when I'm balancing everything. It's just handy for me if I'm living in that VCA space or that center section space. It's helpful. We're going to go to guitars. You could split out electric and acoustic if you wanted. I like to keep them together and then be able to like fine tune the balance of each of them later. Or on the input channels. And then we have our keys, our vocals. We're going to have our speaking mics. And then we might have an extra one. Maybe we'll put our effects returns on another VCA so that we can control the level of that or mute it when someone starts speaking instead of singing. And then maybe we'll have an entire band VCA. So if the band, oops, oh shucks, I hit a button. There we go. If our entire band is a little too loud or we need our vocals just a little bit more out in front, but our band is really big and we don't want to make it louder, we can pull the band back just a little bit, and then that will give enough space for the vocals not to be covered up. And then we're not pushing the boundaries of how loud we can make it. So that band VCA or DCA can be super helpful for you. So now that we've got our DCAs here, then we can go back over here and we can assign them. If we go over to groups, I've got it selected as traditional DCA. That's the way I like it because if you don't have this checked on this particular console, it will make it so that the DCA pulls back the fader itself on the spot in the channel path. It doesn't just remote control it and do it virtually. I prefer it virtually because sometimes, well, let's say you've got your drummer and they need a lot more gain getting to their in-ear monitor mix than you need at front of house, right? The drums are already really smoking loud. And you don't want your channel faders to live at -10 for them to have enough gain to get their in-ear monitors up enough, right? So sometimes I will assign my drums to a VCA or DCA and bring down that VCA channel down to -10 so that my channel faders can all still live right around 0 and not be too loud. When I have set up my gain structure so that my channel faders can live right around 0, I get the finest control or the most precision over the little balance changes that I make. And is it going to make or break your mix? No, but it's one of those things that helps it get more fine-tuned. And the more you're able to dial into, oh, I just want a tiny bit more snare, and you can get just a tiny bit more snare without it being too much, that's super helpful. So traditional DCA is the way that I like to go here. And then, oh, look, I've got drums, bass, guitars, keys. And when you click on these on here, and when you select them on the console, let me go over here. So when you, all right, so we hit DCA groups here, and then we select them. You can see it says drums. I select that. Over here pops out or spills out all the channels that are assigned to that drum VCA. Now, mistakenly, I also have my bass assigned there, but that's just part of the perils of getting this and getting it all worked out. So, bass, like it's got the bass on there, and so forth. So that's one other way you can spill out these channels and get them to where you want to go. On this console, if you press and hold the VCA, then your channels start blinking, and so then you can select which channels go to it. So these would have been my guitar channels, because I cleared some of the names off of this scene but didn't totally clear it completely. You can see if I hold down keys, it will show me the 2 keys channels that I had previously assigned to that VCA. So hitting select makes it stop blinking, and that assigns it to that VCA. If I hit on the drums again and hold, now I can deselect the bass and it will go away from that, and it's good to go now. So that is how you do that. If you guys have any questions, be sure to pop them in the chat. I love answering questions and hanging out with you guys as we go. I realize sometimes I go a little bit quick. So if you like, let me know what you're thinking and what's missing, because I know this stuff really well, and so I don't always teach it really well, because it's just, I know all the information that I haven't said yet. So please feel free to jump in the chat to ask your questions. Okay. So before we get on to the next section, I got a question. Am I streaming live from my mixer board or from software? Currently, I've done it a bunch of different ways here in the studio. I've gone through and used my PreSonus as a USB audio interface to get to OBS. That's my streaming platform and how I'm switching camera stuff. I've done it through the console, and that's great. It gives me a clean output. I can change the settings so that I can go pre-processing going to the computer. So if I've got an EQ or anything on that channel, it can bypass that to get to the computer. And then I use a plug-in on OBS as an audio filter for my voice processing. Right now, I'm actually running my my Deity S-Mic 2 into my Zoom F4, which is mixing the levels and then attenuating the levels to go into my camera's 1/4 or 1/8 inch input, which has a lot of gain and it's noisy, so I apologize if it's a noisy signal today, but it's the simplest way to get both of them there and timed at the same time. And then I'm going through that into an Elgato Camlink 4K, and then that's arriving into OBS. So that's the way that I have it routed for my stream right now. But I really love, I like it a bunch of different ways, but this one doesn't make me chase around the latency between what the Camlink is delaying coming from the video and what I've got to delay on the audio. I was chasing that around all the time. So even though it's noisy, I decided to go this way to get sync issues ironed out. Let's see. How to get matrices working. Okay. I got one more thing I want to go over with you today, and then we'll get to the rest of these questions. So after this point, so we've got our channels labeled, we've got our monitors labeled, and our monitor outputs run to the right place. Hopefully you can use direct outs as much as possible, and the band can mix themselves. If they need help mixing, I've got a couple videos for band and a video for the singers on how to mix your own in your monitors. I will put those in the description below, or throw it up in a card up here if you're watching the replay. So that can be super helpful. If you can use direct outs as much as possible, use direct outs so that you can free up your groups for other things. Then we labeled our aux sends and our outputs. We labeled our effects sends and our effects returns. We could have gone ahead and loaded up our effects processors and gotten some good basic settings on those. Let's see if I can... So we can switch over here and we can set up these. Now they're not quite I love this console, don't get me wrong, but the digital effects reverb time is not quite as intuitive or precise as well, it's precise, but it's not as intuitive for like how long exactly is this reverb time, right? They just have the reflection time in a decimal of like 0.86. I haven't figured out exactly how long like like 1.0 is. It might be like 4 seconds is my guess. But you kind of have to fine tune it this way. But you're going to try to find great reverb settings that are going to work for you. So we've got that one. We've got effects. We're going to go to effects B. Now there's a different reverb. Right, again, we've got our pre-delay, diffusion, size, and reflection, right? This is the reverb time. It doesn't say exactly what that reverb time is. That kind of bugs me. So you could go ahead and set up these to be preset to be ready to go. You got our delay. I've got a mono delay because I was showing some people and it's easier to show on mono delay than stereo. And then we can change it here and just say, no, we don't want a stereo delay. Come on. Let's put a chorus on there. And now we can have a chorus. And there's different presets you can try. All right, so that's what we've got for our effects if that's the way that we want to roll on that. So, here we go. Putting the mic back. Woo. All right, so we've got our effects sends and effects returns dialed in. We've got some basic settings set up so that we're not just starting from scratch every time. We've set up our VCAs so that they make sense. They're in a logical order compared to our input list so that it makes like your brain works really well with relationships. So if the drums are right next to the bass over here and the drums are right next to the bass over there, that's going to help your brain have to use less power and use more power for what frequency do I EQ out of this? Oh my goodness, this sounds weird, right? So saving brain power is also helpful. And then from here, then you're going to start to apply some EQ and compression presets. So if you've watched my videos on how to EQ vocals, you know that a normal vocal just doesn't sound good right out of the box. And there's a reason for that. I even made a video of why live vocal mics sound muffled. But you've got to do something to get it back to normal. And so if you have some of those EQ settings preset, again, that's going to be one less step that you have to do every single time. So think about the things that you do every time you go to start up your mix, and go ahead and save those into the bass scene. Now, when you're loading compression presets, I like to go ahead and set my ratio, attack, and release for what I know that I like to do for that channel when I'm setting that up. So let's say for vocals, I know that I like an attack time of around 12 to 15 milliseconds. I like it to be in RMS mode unless it's a really strident singer, and then I'll go to peak mode. I like a ratio of about 3.5 to 1 to 4 to 1. And my release time, I like around 250 milliseconds. If I know all those things ahead of time, and I can go ahead and preset that onto every one of my vocal channels, before I've had to listen to them, push up the fader, dial back the threshold, and then tweak all the rest of that stuff, if I can just push up the fader, pull down the threshold till I get enough compression, see if I'm liking what I'm hearing from the compression, and then move on, that's a lot more brain power that I've saved for other things and other problematic things. And the more you can anticipate what's coming, the easier time you're going to have when you're actually mixing and trying to make great decisions. Because when you're mixing a long time, it's not your ears that get tired unless it's really, really loud and you've got really loud rehearsal and really loud services. Yes, then your ears get tired. But your brain gets tired of making decisions. So the more decisions you can have set up beforehand, the easier time you're going to have when you're mixing. So we got a couple more questions here. So we've got George asking would you recommend hitting a vocal with an 1176 emulation, or will that induce a larger risk of feedback? It's a great question. I have to start by saying not all 1176 emulations are created equal, because the hardware isn't equal, right? The hardware varies from unit to unit. Sometimes different things get worn out in different processors. So 1176 can be awesome on vocals, but you have to treat it a certain way. And here's what I mean. There's two kind of difficult things about the 1176. The first is that it's got input and output. It doesn't have threshold and makeup gain. So let me show you. They've got one on here. I don't have a vocal to run through it at the moment that I can show you, but actually I think I do. So if you'll bear with me and you've got a minute, I can show you this, but it'll take a second. But that's the fun of doing this live, right? So let me get this set up. Let's go. I don't know which channel it's on, but we'll find it. But I don't have my console audio routed back to get to you guys. So you won't be able to hear it. But I'll still do it, and then hopefully you can see what I mean, even though you can't hear it clearly other than through my mic, which isn't going to sound great. So disclaimer, this vocal isn't going to sound great because it's going through a console, out my speakers over here, and into this mic, which is supposed to reject sound from the sides. So don't take this as an audio example. You've been warned. So let's go here. We're going to go to our compressor. Oops, not doing universal control. Overhead camera. Okay, so we've got our compressor, and we're going to switch to our FET compressor, right? That's the 1176 emulation. See if I can zoom in any closer on here. So the thing about this is our normal compressor. Sorry that I'm not talking into the mic. I'm having to face two different directions at the same time. Right? Our standard compressor. Come on. This is why I don't like touch screens, y'all. Okay. So our standard compressor has threshold, ratio, attack, release, and output gain. So the big difference here is the 1176 is still going to have the attack, ratio, and release, right? But it does not have threshold and makeup gain. It has input and output. Let me switch to that again. So we've got input and we've got output. The ratio on here is actually fixed. So there's no way, the more you drive into the input, the more you will be hitting onto that, into that threshold, onto that compression ratio, because your input level is higher. So to get the same rough level, you have to turn up your input and turn down your output, right? So that's going to get you more compression with about the same level if you do that. If you just crank up your input to get enough compression, you're going to get a lot more gain. And without dialing this output back, you're actually going to get a lot more gain, which can tend to run into feedback that way. So in one essence, yes, this 1176 can get you into trouble with feedback if you don't trim down the output before you turn up the input in a live situation. The other thing about the 1176 is that it is a very, very fast compressor. It's like as fast can be when it comes to compressors. And that's one of the cool things about it, is that it can respond really quickly. If you've watched my videos on compression, you'll remember that a fast attack gets us a thinner sound, while a slow attack gets us a thicker sound. So the more you push into this 1176 and push it hard, your vocal will end up sounding thinner and smaller if you go too far. But if you just knock off the peaks, it can be brilliant and get it this nice, like, in-your-face sound. And if it's the right emulation, which I really like the Waves CLA series of these emulations, so it's the CLA 76, it can get this beautiful distortion that just brings it into your face, and you're like, it's got this smooth polish in your face thing. It's amazing. I love it. Not every emulation has that, and so it's not always like the thing that like lights me up and makes me go, aha, I love this, because that other one does, and I just like that. So the 1176 can be good, but you can't push it too hard or else your vocals will sound small and thin. And you have to be careful that you don't crank up the input gain to get enough gain reduction and don't pull back the output gain at the same time. Matthew Ryan, replying to George, says, have you tried the RVox from Waves? I think he was asking George, but I'm going to answer that too. And yes, I have tried RVox from Waves, and it's brilliant. It does the attack and release automatically. It does the ratio automatically, and it's just a brilliant compressor. But again, it's got the same problem. You crank down on that threshold, and it has an auto gain feature where it gains it up. You got to pull back the output before you crank down on that gain, and that can keep you safe. That can be really, really helpful. If I use the Soothe 2 on anything else, on anything live, I've not used Soothe 2 before, but I need to check it out, apparently. Jose Cardona, mixing at a church in Brooklyn, New York. Hey, thanks for serving God in Brooklyn. Happy to have you here. Let's see, any other questions we got? I think that's it for today. Alexei, hello from Russia. Good to have you here too. Glad you could tune in. If you're just tuning in, I'm about to sign off. And before I sign off, I'd like to invite you to subscribe and ding the little bell. I love hanging out with you guys. My life does not work for me to have this scheduled right now, where I'm doing a live stream on a consistent basis at a consistent time. But because I'm not consistent, you're going to have to turn on notifications and get that little bell icon dinged so that you can know when I go live. And I try to give you guys a heads up and schedule it so that it's like, oh, it's happening in 15 minutes. But I got a lot of moving pieces in my life. I cannot always guarantee that I'm going to go live at the exact same time. So thank you guys for watching. I'm super blessed to have you as part of my team. Be sure to share this with a friend if this is going to be helpful for you or for them. And don't forget that I've got the buy one, give one special going on for the Mixing Foundations course. It is going to be live through Tuesday. That's tomorrow at 10 a.m. So after that, I'm shutting it down and that deal will be gone. So if you're thinking about it, you have 18 hours, something like that, to think about it and get on that bus. So all that being said, thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate you. You guys are the heroes of this channel because you're the ones in the trenches actually doing the stuff. I'm just showing you how to do it a little bit better every time. So thank you for watching. I appreciate you guys. And this is me signing off. I'll see you guys later.